So today I wanted to show you how I work in this headset. I have been in and out of it over the last month or so, trying to decide whether it is a good work environment for me. And over the last week, I've kind of been thinking about whether my habits with it leaned into the strengths of the device, especially when there has been this new, or as this new kind of computing paradigm emerges. I think a lot of the old habits I had about computers and a lot of my initial ideas about how to use this thing effectively for productivity were wrong. And I think a lot of the videos I've seen, I'm not going to say they're wrong, but they just didn't work for me necessarily. So I wanted to show you how I'm doing some windowing in this thing, kind of just generally slow things down a little bit on the channel, and talk about, how I use the device, like just very simply how I use this device.
I genuinely as well, like, I'm not sure going into the future that there is a world in which both the iPad and the Vision Pro exist. Because, like, for me, I could imagine everything I do on my iPad to be done on a device like this one instead.
It is the best iPad, in a way.
Oh, bold. Federico, please put a pin in that. I want to hear your thought on that later on. Like, yeah. I don't disagree with you, Stephen. Like, I'm just, like, really intrigued as to what Federico thinks about that statement.
Yeah, no, this is sort of the angle that I think I'm working towards. Like, is the Vision Pro the best iPad Pro money can buy right now in the United States? Yeah, probably, because I mean, it's a new platform based on iPadOS. It runs iPad apps with an asterisk, some of them, and it doesn't have the limitations of iPadOS when it comes to windows of apps around you, and you can make them bigger and open as many as you want. Like, the only difference realistically is that obviously this is something you put on your face, and an iPad is something that you can hold, without having to wear a face computer. But yeah, like that idea of, is this the best iPad? It's really intriguing.
So, sorry, you have to listen to my crunching. This is my kind of current setup that I have been using 99% of the time when I'm doing work in this headset. I have my Mac display up. I make it a little smaller than what they kind of default to. And I like this in particular, this kind of Mac continuity sidecar thing, because I like that it's at an ergonomic height for myself. One thing that I tend to do when I have my computer down here is that I end up really slouching, and my back doesn't do well. And actually, one thing I like to do is I like to sit cross-legged at my desk. And so to be able to sit cross-legged like this, it wasn't impossible before, but to be able to sit up straight and make sure that my back muscles are engaged while I'm sitting up, and that I'm not slouching over and like hunching and things like this. It allows me to sit up and be at attention. I know you can't see me right now, but it positions it directly in front of my eyes, and it gives me the space of a large Mac monitor that I otherwise wouldn't have and would otherwise be positioned lower. And this is always kind of a tension, right? Even when I had a monitor over here, I had to elevate the monitor to get it high enough. But then because I didn't have a great stand, it was like a little wobbly. This feels very fixed in place, and it feels like it's right in front of me. Now, a lot of people have talked about how this kind of like series of compressions and wireless connections makes it not a super sharp display, and that's definitely true. Text is not super easy to read, although I will say that over time it has become easier for me to read what's on my screen. And you can also do things like increase the or decrease the display density and make text bigger on certain applications that you feel like you need to. But you can see here, I'm in the middle, I use Obsidian, and you can see my notes, how they're all connected over here. And I like to use Obsidian for all of my note-taking purposes. I use the Zettelkasten method, or a Zettelkasten type method to organize my notes. And I've done this for, I want to say, 3 years now, almost 3 years now. And it started out as an Obsidian thing. And I have used it a lot on the iPad version. So when I don't have my Mac with me, I'll go ahead and just show you. I open up the compatible Obsidian app, and I move it in a little closer. I'm going to go ahead and close out of this guy. And you can see I was working on the same thing here before. And actually, I love the gestures with this stack tab mode on Obsidian in order to be able to control exactly which one I'm looking at, and then also manipulate the graph. So it feels very, this probably appeals to the sci-fi nerd in me, but it feels very futuristic to be able to, pull my fingers together and like look through my graph here and look at all the things that get connected. And if you watch my channel, you'll recognize a lot of these notes. But it's fun to really explore this way. There's a lot that I wish I could do more with Obsidian. But it's fun to use the iPad app itself on here after they released it, and sort of check that checkbox. Now, as far as actual Vision Pro apps go, I almost always have at least one window of Safari open. I like to have them surrounding me like this, and this is kind of what I've seen people do with their windowing habits in the past. They put things kind of all around them. Like if I were to keep opening apps, I might have a matter window over here, and I might, like all this. People talk about like stock traders and things like that. I might have an overcast window up here, and it's like this huge kind of overwhelming set of displays. And actually, I haven't found that to be super necessary. I tend to work with just I tend to have like a deeper focus on a particular app, and I'll quickly adjust my attention to one thing or the other, and then come back to the thing I'm primarily focused on. And that's just me. That's just how I work, right? But there's also something else. So I also like to have my music playing up above, right? But when I dial into an environment, and let me grab my keyboard for this. When I dial into an environment, we've got a dark environment because I was in a dark environment last night. We'll go ahead and change that. I like to dial it in, and you can see, watch the desk, right? As I dial it in, you can see it sort of slowly encroaches further and further onto my keyboard. I like to dial it right up to the point where my keyboard kind of looks like it's like just about to float off into the edge of the abyss here. You can go a little further than that, but if you go all the way, you eventually lose the keyboard altogether, right? Now I've got this ghost keyboard that doesn't exist there. And if we go too far, it sort of isn't as immersive, so I can see the things behind here, and it's like I like to think of these environments as like a desktop wallpaper that you'd set on your computer, on your PC. But I like to dial it in so that way it kind of feels like it really feels like I'm inside of the computer at this point, which is in some ways very true. I'm inside of the computer. Like I now feel like I'm relatively immersed, but I'm anchored in my real world kind of once I go past that 180-degree mark. So I'm going to go a little further. And when I do windowing, I actually don't love having this one up above. The reason I had it up above is because when I dial it out, I want everything in front of this literally physical piece of wood here, right? And it looks kind of weird when I push it through, right? Like it's like occluding here, and I like get sort of disoriented when it's like that. So I like to have it all within like it would physically be an actual object in my space. But the advantage of having the environment is that it gives me more space to window. And I would say originally what I did was have everything around me still. Like I kept everything either close in or far out, and it was all around me, kind of like I talked about that sort of like stock trader trope almost, right? And then my second inclination was to take these windows and place a second array of them further out like this, right? And then what I might do is I would open up, let's go ahead and say, let's just say the App Store. Probably wouldn't have the App Store open, but just to demonstrate here, I would have kind of a second plane of windows. So I have this kind of plane of windows that is much closer to me, right? This set right here that are right in maybe 2 or 3 feet away from me. And then I've got this other set of windows that are, maybe more like I want to say 10, 15 feet away from me. And so I ended up with these kind of layers of, let's see. These layers of windows like this, right? Now, most recently, I've realized that actually what I like to do, well, first of all, let me show you something. So I would say completely without the Mac involved here. I've talked about this before. Keyboard is, I think, absolutely necessary if you're getting productivity done. I would even argue that a keyboard and trackpad are very important in order to get work done. Because what happens is when I look at one of these windows, I'm looking at the bottom of this Matter window right now, and I just slightly jiggle the mouse, the cursor appears exactly in that window. And not only that, it appears where I'm looking. So if I look at the bottom corner of this window and I touch the magic trackpad, it appears in that bottom corner. And if I look up at this top corner, you can see that it's going to appear in that top corner. And so the great thing about having these kind of deep layers, and this works really well in environments, is that I can have the App Store and I can have my attention on Matter, I can control it like this, then I can look back there and I can either tap my fingers together and get over to that window, or I can have my finger on this trackpad and just start looking over at the thing I want to control. And it's kind of very fluid in the way that it allows me to look at what I'm doing. And unlike it, I like to liken this to traditional window management on like a PC or a Mac, right? If I was on my Mac here, what I would be doing is I'd layer the things, right? And there'd be this implicit sense of Z space, even on a two-dimensional display, right? I have windows in front of others, they occlude each other. There's these redundant clues that we have about depth, and the Mac makes use of some of those redundant clues, like the occlusion. Like my Obsidian window appears in front of my music window on my Mac because I can see all of my Obsidian window, and it covers up some of the window behind it. Now, on this, it's very similar. I can sort of window manage the way I would do on a Mac, but now there's even more redundant clues to depth. Like I can literally move around and like move my head and look, which is not very ergonomic, but the point is that it has even more redundant clues to depth, and using depth to your advantage in this scenario is very useful to having, I think, a very productive work environment, or a work environment where you can switch focuses very quickly. So on that note, you'll notice that all of these things in close to me, the way I like to use it, are all tightly related. This is some of reading that is going to go into my Zettelkasten. This is stuff that I use for browsing, and then maybe will eventually end up in Matter. And then kind of behind, I have more casual things, right? I've got my music playing literally in the background. I've got my, this might be like messages if this wasn't being recorded, right? And I can quickly look at those things. I might have like a YouTube video or something playing in the background as well. And so these layers, these literal layers, are very useful to me when I've been doing some window management on visionOS. Now, Safari is a very good example of, it's maybe the best visionOS app, actually. You can see here, it's got this crazy tab view. This is all my research that I've been doing. And this is great, but actually I came here to open up a new window because I like that you can have multiple windows of certain apps. And so like a good example is that I might have two Safari windows open, and they're actually, you can see there's this one, and it's actually occluding this one. It's sort of like vaporizing everything in front of it. And then I can look at this one closer and begin working. But behind here, I might have, let's say, YouTube open. And I might scroll through and there'll be things on there, right? Now, what I'll say more recently is that this was, putting these windows behind here kind of feels very extreme now to me. I think there's still some validity to it, especially in these environment spaces. But what I actually really like to do is move these in a little closer and make the layering between these windows a little tighter and a little less extreme. Now, this has pros and cons, I would say. The pros being something that I'll show you in a second. The cons being that it does require a little more precision with the placement. But once I have my workspace up, you can see the same principles kind of apply, and it works very similarly to how I would work on a Mac, right? I've got these windows very closely layered. It feels very spatial at this point, right? I can tell that this window is in front of this window, right? And it very quickly allows me to look through these things, and then I could have even more layers than that, right? So I could go, let's go ahead and open up Keynote, and I might place that kind of like down here, and then I can look to this, or I can look to my thing here, or I can look down below, and that's there. And you can see how now I'm building out this entire environment and workspace that otherwise I might not have been able to create. Now, I want to show you something, and this was the motivating factor for me, changing it from that like close plane, far plane window management to this close plane, and then a little bit further, this kind of current setup. And that's when I leave the environment. You can kind of leave the environment, and you can see that your windows stay up there, right? But that the environment now is my real world, right? I can look around, I can go do something, I can cut my apples, I can do laundry. I've opened up a TV along the side here in the past too. But that as soon as I go back in, it's kind of like, again, it really feels like I'm this space now. I've entered my computing area in some ways. So I find too that like a lot of the time I can just sit here the same way I'd sit at my computer, plug in the battery, set it off to the side, and I will just cross my legs and plug away, basically. Um, and one of the things about this is it just feels very, like, I feel extremely focused in it. And I don't know if it's because I have ADHD or whether it's because I, just am excited about being in this environment right now. It's very difficult to kind of tease things out at the moment. But I can say that I've lost time in this device in a way that I haven't in others. And that's something that Gruber said long time ago, I think, when the device first came out, is that he finds himself losing time in this device in the same way that he lost time in his Mac when he was in college, right? And I definitely get that feeling as well, where I kind of like look up and suddenly 2 hours are gone and I have just done like literally 2 hours of really deep focused work. Whereas like on my phone or my iPad, it's easier to kind of be snapped out of that in some ways. And that's one of the reasons why it's nice to plug this thing in. But when I want to go on the go, it's really easy to just throw it in my pocket and kind of like be out in the world. So that is how I have been using Apple Vision Pro to get some of my work done. The majority of my work, at least for this channel, is sitting and putting together my notes, basically, in a cohesive manner. Just laying things out in a way that either feels novel or speaks to some question that people have or anything like that. And I think I said early on in my impressions on the mountain that I was missing a lot of those things. Like I didn't have Devon Think, didn't have Obsidian, and those were crucial to my workflow. And I guess what I'd say now is that pro workflows, right? When you have a set of tools that work for you, it's very difficult to convince pros to move away from those tools because you're an artisan. You're someone who is working with a set of tools and are doing the work that feels like it has the least amount of friction for you, right? And so for me, in the past, that's been using Apple products. It's been using a Mac. It's been using an iPad, using an iPhone, and leaning into the ecosystem and using a user experience that I found superior, and the applications that I've come to know and love. And so for me, the applications were the most important thing. On the iPad, it was important because they transformed that piece of glass into the thing that I needed, right? And I used things like Obsidian to do that, right? And when this didn't have that, initially for me, it's a huge issue. But as developers have either made apps specifically for the Vision Pro or allowed their iPad apps to run on it, it's become more and more compelling for me to start layering these things out and use it in the sense that I've talked about in the past, which is kind of like that multi-pad lifestyle, right? It's like having a bunch of iPads here and here and here and here of any size that I wanted to, just without the same kind of touch affordances and the pencil affordances that I otherwise would have. So I'm coming around to this idea of spatial computing. And I've always kind of seen the potential of it, but I'm just now seeing how it works in practice. I think there's a long way to go. It's a version 1 product. I'm far from the first person to say that. But that's all to say that it is working as advertised in that sense, and that I've found that kind of immersive environment, being able to sit down in this chair and immediately feel like I'm back in my work, like just in an environment where my tools are out there. It's like it's like I don't know, a blacksmith going to their anvil, right, and having their tools laid out in front of them. It's like a jeweler going to their desk and having their tools in front of them. It's like an artist going to their studio and having their tools in front of them. I will say, and this is something I've been thinking about for a while, and this is actually something that even preceded this channel, went all the way back to my blog, that it's missing a lot of window management. And I think that there's a lot to be said about that, and I will be saying a lot about that in the future. But window management, I think, is the thing that is both the most interesting part of this, because it's the first Apple device since the Mac that lets you freely manage windows, but it's also the device that most sorely needs a set of window management tools that simply don't exist for it yet. Thanks for watching. I'm really curious about what you all want to know more about with this thing. I'd love to give you more of these hands-on videos, but I want to make sure I'm addressing them to you because you all are the reason that I would have anything to show, I guess. For me, I kind of know how it works. I have an idea, and I can kind of give some ideas about how I do my work in there, but it's not going to change much. So if you have specific questions, it'd be great for me to hear them. Anyways, thanks for watching, and it's been fun the last couple of weeks. We've had some fun videos that we've been able to put out, so I really appreciate all the feedback, and oh my God, I like the amount of incredibly thoughtful comments that are out there that I've been able to highlight or serve as an inspiration for future videos. You all are the best, and thank you for that. So I'll see you in the future.